Hi everyone, and welcome to episode number 15 of the Emigrant podcast, where we share stories of people who left their country to chase a better life. I'm Daniel De Biasi, and my guest this week moved from Colombia to the United States to study. He left Bogota to learn English when he was only 16, just after high school. Because of the bad economy at that time in Colombia, he decided to continue studying and go to college in the US to have a better career. Fast forward 20 years, he's now a successful civil engineer living in New York. In this episode, Felipe will share how he learned English and tips on how to be prepared when you move to a new country. Before we move to my conversation with Felipe, make sure to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast, and it would be great if you could give us a 5-star review. And now, without further ado, please enjoy this episode with Felipe. Hi Felipe, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, Daniel. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. You?
Good, pretty good.
Awesome. So where are you from?
I'm originally from Bogota, Colombia. I was born and raised in Bogota, Colombia.
Okay. And where do you live now?
I live in New York, in the state of New York. I live up about 60 miles north of New York City in a small town called Goshen, which is in Orange County, is what we call the Hudson Valley. So it's a very unique area. You have the New York City close by, but you're not in New York City, so it's perfect.
It's like a more rural.
Yeah, it is. You can call it that. It's a lot of farmland, a lot of space, and quiet neighborhood. So I don't think it's suburbs. It's rural. So that's the right definition. So yeah.
Okay. And how long have you been in the country, in the US?
Oh boy. So I first came when I was 16. That was 1998. I came after high school. I came to learn English. My parents simply said, all right, let's just go and learn some English before you start college. And so I came for 6 months, went back to Colombia, spent a year there, started college there. But then there was during that time, like late 90s, there was a big financial crisis in Colombia, and there was, a little bit of tough times. So my parents pretty much said, well, you're the middle of the three. Your sister is finishing high school. Your brother is about to finish college, but we have the money for the next semester, but we won't really be able to pay much more than that. So we can give you that money. You can go and try to figure something out in somewhere else. We will support anything you do, any decisions you make. And that's how I said, well, let me try this again. And so I came back a year later. After that, I just decided to stay. I applied for college and got some scholarships. I got some help and was able to pay my tuition like that. With a little bit of help from my parents. It wasn't as much as if I was paying there, so they were able to help me out a little bit, and went to college and became a civil engineer. So that was 99, so about 21 years I've been here.
Oh, that's awesome. So how easy was to get from Colombia to US and into college?
I think in my situation, I think it was relatively easy. Because of course, I came with a student visa. And what I did is I first applied for a student visa to learn English, which is a lot easier than applying for a student visa if you are going to start a degree. And basically, it's not that was the way I did it, but that's how I decided to do it, because I knew I had to first get my English better so I could actually get into engineering school. I needed to pass my TOEFL. I needed to take my exams and all that. So I knew my English wasn't that great at the time. So I was like, all right, I better get my English better. Then after I felt comfortable, I took my TOEFL. I was able to get a good score. I said, all right, let me now apply for schools. And then I passed. They accepted me, so I was able to transfer the visa at that point. It just, you transfer the visa from school to school but it's a lot easier at that point. So it wasn't that difficult. I mean, since at the end of the day, it's just a matter of making sure that you have all your paperwork in order. And in my case, I did have a couple scholarships that helped me back that financial aspect of coming to school, because of course you're paying out of state tuition, which is quite a bit, in comparison. So I was able to do that and got myself a couple jobs on campus, because as a student in a student visa, you cannot work elsewhere. So I got a job on campus. I worked at dorms. I worked at helping the students at the dorms and settling them in and cleaning the dorms after everybody was gone and doing all sorts of things. And that's how I paid my living. So in exchange for working on dorms, I will get my rent. So that's kind of how it worked out.
Okay, and you say you got a couple of scholarships. That's because you were like a good student. How did you get the scholarships?
At the time, I wouldn't say it was because I was a good student, because it was, I think it was, I just looked out that I had someone kind of gave me a tip on a couple scholarships for minorities. So for Hispanics, in my case, that didn't require, typically scholarships require citizenship or resident status. But these scholarships in particular did not require any of that. They were open pretty much for anyone. And they were geared towards Hispanics. So that's how it worked out. Nowadays, this is 20 years ago. Nowadays, the opportunities are a little bit better. Scholarships, I was talking to somebody and they were telling me that they don't require as much. They don't have as many requirements when it comes to citizenship and that kind of stuff, because there's a lot more nonprofits that are helping immigrants now, in that sense.
Okay, I didn't know that. I thought it was harder for people from abroad than to get into schools in the US.
It is. It is, and it isn't. I think it is matter of making sure that you do your homework on how to get to school, because you can make your life a lot harder if you don't do the homework. But in a way, it's, for me, it was relatively easy, and I was able to successfully go through my 4 years of college.
Awesome. And when you graduated, was your plan to stay in the US, or were you trying to stay in the US, or you were planning to move back to Colombia?
Yeah, when I graduated, it was weird, because I was like, all right, I have, after you graduate from school, from with your bachelor's degree, they give you like a work permit for a year, or at the time, I don't know if it has changed now, it's been a while, but they gave you a work permit at the time for a year. So what I had is I was able to have an internship on my senior year, which is allowed by immigration. So I worked at an engineering company, and then the engineering company said, well, if you want to continue working with us, feel free. We will continue paying you, and you continue working. I was like, great. So I applied for my permit. I got my permit. I continued working. And then during that time, it was like, all right, I have two options. I can go back to Colombia and not really do anything else. I just find a job there. But at the time, I had already met my now wife, so I had a girlfriend at the time. And my company, I asked my company, what are the possibilities for visa sponsorship? They kind of knew going in that I was going to go for that, and they accepted that offer for me, and they say, yeah, we will sponsor you. This is, we're talking 2004, 2005. It was not that difficult. I mean, 9/11 had happened already, but it was still relatively easy to get a work permit, a work visa. So I applied for the work visa through the company. They sponsored me, and I stayed. And then a few years later, I got married. So my plan was, I didn't really have a plan at the time. it was, I will take kind of like year by year, kind of like, let's see how much I can get, see, one thing that I knew from the get-go is that I will never become an illegal immigrant. Uh, so I knew that. So it was always trying to find a way to stay and try to get my visas and my work permits, or whatever I needed to get. But yeah, after a year working and not really experiencing what was that professional life in Colombia, I thought it would be a little bit difficult for me to go back, because I will have to start from scratch. Yeah, I can take my degree, but in a lot of ways, I will have to create my own network, of professional and get all that going. And I had already established that here, through school. I had already professional connections. I had already all that. So I thought it would be difficult. So that's why I said go all the way and let's try to stay and figure it out. And of course, finding my wife, made it a lot easier, because at that point it's like, oh yeah, you're not going back.
Is she like American or she's an immigrant as well?
She is first generation immigrant. So her parents came, 45 years ago from Colombia, and she was born here. So, so she's Colombian American in a way.
Okay, yeah. You said you went, so the first school or the first time you went to the US was to learn the language. First of all, how long did it take you to learn and master the language, and the thing that helped you the most to learn the language?
It took me a good year to be comfortable with the way that I will say I can have a conversation. I can, and not feel intimidated, because that's kind of like the biggest thing is like, be intimidated when you don't really know the language and your brain doesn't work that way. One thing that did help me a lot was the house where I lived. They had a 4-year-old at the time, and she will watch Disney movies all day long. So that's what I did when I was not in school. I will just watch Disney movies with her. So, and her being a 4-year-old, and it was actually a house of Colombian friends. They spoke Spanish, but the little girl didn't really talk a lot of Spanish to her. So at 3 years old, 4 years old, she would just speak English, and I kind of had to, reply to her. And then before I knew it, because I guess it was her, I didn't have that fear of messing up. So I lost that fear. I lost that, that I guess shyness of making mistakes or anything like that, because I knew she wasn't going to laugh at me. So it kind of worked out at the end. And then as I got into college and I had jobs, it just definitely helped, because at that point it's like, all right, you just have to work on it or you won't be able to do anything. So that kind of helped. Definitely having a job and being just forced to do it, that helped.
Yeah, speaking about the cartoons, it's not the first person then says that actually watching cartoons, and because when you learn a language, it's pretty much the same level of 4 years old. The same level on English, the same way they learn the language is pretty much the same way we could learn the language too. So it's not the first person that tells me that watching cartoons, Disney cartoons for kids is actually helping learning the language.
Yep, that's pretty much it. Yeah, it's pretty funny, but yeah, I got to a point where I'll know the Lion King pretty well.
But I guess when you get into work, you can't use the same kind of terminology, the same kind of English. You need to learn the technical words. It's kind of like a completely different language.
Yes, and that's one of the things that I realized, like you asked me earlier about going back to Colombia. I realized I worked in Puerto Rico a few years ago, and they speak Spanish, and while I realized that, yeah, I could get my point across, there were so many technical terms that I only knew in English, because that's how I learned it. That's how I learned it in school. And when I talk to friends in Colombia and stuff like that about like technical stuff or things like that, there are things that I just don't know because I didn't learn it that way. So it's interesting because you're right. It doesn't, you once you learn certain terms and certain way of the working English that I call, it's very difficult to me it's very difficult to go back to Spanish at that point. So that was one of the things that I realized. I'm like, yeah, if I try to go back now, it's going to be starting from scratch because I have to learn a lot of new terms.
Yeah, you're right, and that's funny because you can even on site when I work, I can hear people on a different language. They communicate in a different language. Could be Spanish, could be I don't know any other language. But you can hear some terminology. They talk to each other in their language, but some words are in English because even for the same reason, they probably don't know the same word in their language. It's just because, as you said, we learn in English, and that's the only way we know.
Yep, exactly.
Do you have any regrets about leaving Colombia?
Not really. I mean, of course, I think that one of the regrets as of me leaving the country, no. Regrets about missing things of my family, yes. Because I'm the middle child of three. My parents live in Colombia. My brother and sister are still there. My brother came and got his MBA here, but he went back a year after his work permit expired. No, actually, he got his work visa and then he moved back. But that's kind of my only regret is me missing family events, family things. That's probably the only thing I regret. And I try to go back at least once a year. We try to go back and at least spend a week with them and try to make the best out of those times. Still, you miss those things. But other than that, like leaving the country as a whole, not necessarily. I mean, I left as a 16-year-old, 17-year-old, so it's not like you have established life or something established for you to say, all right, yeah, I regret leaving all that behind. You're just starting life at 16. So yeah, I don't have those regrets.
What was the biggest upside about emigrating?
I think in general, it's really the opportunity. That's kind of one of the reasons, when I went for that year that I went in between after high school, I went back for a year. When I was in college there, going for a civil engineering too, I just did not see the opportunity. It was a tough time for the country at the same time. It was kind of like a big financial crisis going on and real estate crisis and pretty much you name it. And at the time, I just didn't really see the opportunity that what am I going to do 3-5 years from now? Have a job and maybe make, a certain amount of money, but really did not see that opportunity that I saw when I was here and when I said, all right, if I can work towards this, I can get that. And then I will move to that direction. And I think that's kind of like the biggest upside is just that opportunity. And in a way, I think I was very lucky to have good mentors through my career that helped me guide that direction where I wanted to go in my professional life and as well as having my wife by my side at that time. That really helped me.
Okay, and do you think you would be able, if you didn't go to the US, you think you wouldn't be able to have the same kind of career in Colombia or no?
Good question. I don't know. I probably would, but probably would have been a lot harder to get. Not that it hasn't been hard to get here and to get to where I'm at here, but I think it would have been a lot more difficult to get.
Because like at less demand of your job?
And simply the lack of opportunity for it.
Okay.
I just don't see that there is, or at the time I didn't see there was that. Now probably it's a little bit different. My brother actually tells me all the time that I should just go back and I will do so well with my knowledge, my career, my experience, but it's something that I'm not even willing to entertain now. But it's different times. It's 20 years later, and it's different times. I do have an experience established. I have a resume that I can show, and it validates what I've done, but not necessarily if I was, 20, 22, graduating from college, thinking, all right, this is what I'm going to do. Probably I would have had a hard time finding a job to begin with, because that's just the reality back then. And even now, the unemployment is pretty high to some extent. So recent grads have a hard time finding jobs and getting their careers going. So.
And because even the other thing is, because you have a career in the US, it would be easier from the US moving to a country like Colombia or even Europe if you work in the US, but it would be much harder from Colombia. If you had a career in Colombia, have experience in Colombia, move to the US, is
correct.
It's not a good way to say it, but it's kind of seemed like a less professional, because it seems like the experience.
Yeah.
So even working in this kind of country, like a US, Europe, or I don't know what other country they can be. It probably depends even the sector you're in your field, but that means a lot in your career. If you want to grow in your career, maybe working in this kind of country would be helpful to actually find a better job if you want to move back to your country.
Yeah, definitely. And you're right. You're exactly right. And that's what I've seen a lot is people eventually that immigrate like I did, and they kind of just get to a point where they said, all right, I think I've worked enough out here, and I think it's time to go back and give back to my country. That's more or less what my brother did. And he worked 5 years, and when he moved back, he was able to open up his own company and be very successful at it. But he had that experience from here. Versus as you're starting from there, it's difficult to do it.
Yeah, no, exactly. And there was like a one particular thing that was kind of like a more challenging in your experience in the US?
I think in a way it was like at the beginning trying to figure out things. Well, I got lucky as I started my professional career to have the right mentors in that way. I think at the beginning was the biggest challenge was, you are here alone in a new country, barely speak the language. I was not in New York at the time. I was down in Florida because that's where I started college. But it was still difficult. It was just kind of like finding that sometimes that motivation to keep going. You asked me about regrets. It wasn't a regret. It was more of a questioning of my sanity of, did I do the right thing? Did I jump too early on doing these things? People usually jump on these opportunities to get their master's degree after they're a little bit more grown and mature. And I jumped on it as right out of high school. So that was kind of like the most challenging. But I was lucky that I had my family who they supported me from the distance and helped me have that motivation that it was for a better future, that it was something bigger than what I was living at that time. So that was really what helped me overcome that challenge, because it was pretty tough times at the beginning. It's being a middle child, I guess. In a way, I was, semi-protected from my family in a way, and never had left home or lived by myself or anything like that. So it's pretty tough, and you grow and you learn and you just move on with this, and at the end of the day you look back and you say, well, that was tough, but I came on the other side, so that's what matters.
No, exactly. I mean, you were 16 when you moved to the US. That's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, at 16, I probably didn't even know how to fold a t-shirt.
Well, yeah, I had to learn how to do laundry. I had to start from there.
You know, exactly. I mean, it's 16. Even did you get help from anybody in the US? Like even just to figure out what you have to do, where to go to school, or to move
I
around, immigration, everything.
I came to my parents had a couple friends that a family that I came to live with, and they helped me. They gave me they gave me a hand, and I'm very thankful for that. Um, but I only spent with them maybe a year, and then I decided to. That's when I decided to move down to Florida because I wanted. I got tired of the cold weather in New Jersey, and I wanted something different, and I picked South Florida for that. So, and then at that point, I was, like you said, I was alone. I was like, all right, never been to this place. What do I do? And it was just figuring out on my own. And I quickly found who were the international students in the on campus because it always happens that we gravitated to each other. So I ended up becoming good friends with a guy from Spain and a guy from Turkey, and the guy from Turkey had a car, so we were able to get to places with him. You know how it is. It was just matter of just surviving at that point and making sure that you were getting your basic needs done and fulfilled. But it was pretty interesting. It was a learning experience, and as I've been here this long, a lot of people ask me how do you do this? How do you do that? And what I tell them and my best advice to people is this is what you should not do. Don't do what I did. If you're going to come, try to have this, try to have that. I'm not saying come with, X thousands of dollars so that you have a perfect life, but don't come under with the understanding that you're going to find everything and this is like just so easy to find everything. No, you if you don't have that, you have to work pretty hard for it. And why? If you have the opportunity to make your life a little bit easier through the process, do that. You don't have to, suffer or work extra hard for that dream if you can have it a little bit easier in a way. So I tell people, this is what you should not do. Learn from what I did and don't do that. Because I have a lot of friends and family that always ask me, hey, I want to go, I want to do this, I want to do that. And when I start telling them what the process is and how things work and how things may not work for them based on how I know they behave or or what their expectations are, things start shifting a little bit and they start analyzing their situation a little bit different. And then what ends up happening is that if they come, their experience is a lot better because at least they had that eye opener at one point. So that's what I try to do sometimes.
No, you're totally right. Even for me, my first experience in New Zealand, I went there with no English at all, and I managed to get a visa to like pretty much renew a visa and being extended for another 2 years within 6 months. So when I decided to move to Canada, I thought if I could get a visa in New Zealand in 6 months with no English, nothing, how hard could it be when I go to Canada? It would be much easier. I was wrong. That didn't matter. It didn't matter my English level. The immigration process was completely different. The economy and how the people work here, it was completely different. The situation was completely different. I came here unprepared. I thought, how hard can it be? Just go there and figure things out like I did in New Zealand would be much easier. And it wasn't. So you were right. Every country is different. Every country's got different rules. And it's better be prepared than come here and find himself like overwhelmed with all the regulation and not having enough time to extend your visa and manage to stay.
Correct. Yeah, and I think in a way it's knowing what you are expecting, but at the same time knowing what are your limits. Because more often than not, when you try to get a new life and try to, because coming to a different country, it's just you're getting a new life. You're forgetting everything that you had done wherever you're from and coming here or coming to whatever country you go to, and it's a new life. So it's knowing what are your limits. Like you said, I didn't know how to even do laundry. Uh, you know, I ran out of clean clothes. I'm like, oh, what do I do now? It's knowing that you have to learn to do things on your own that you probably haven't done in your entire life, or even if you don't come to school and you come to immigrate just as escape or whatever your case be, from any situation that you're in, it's trying to be open that when you come to a different country, you can forget anything that you did before, and you are starting from the bottom up, and you have to be ready for that. Because sometimes you won't be able to work in your whatever you went to school back home. Like you said, it's a lot difficult to work in something when you come to these countries. But it's like, it's just a matter of knowing that this may be temporary, that is kind of like your way, like I call it, paying your dues, for making that decision and for taking that leap. And at the same time, having a goal in mind, because more often than not, you see immigrants that come to the country and they have their visas or whatever they have, and they just get into the vicious circle of working, but forgetting about that goal, that dream that they had is, be it at the end of X years, I want to be able to work in the field that I went to school for, or what I was doing, or things like that. You just get into that vicious circle of just working and trying to survive, that you forget about your goals. So having that, those goals is definitely important, and not forgetting about them. To me, that's super important for anyone that is trying to immigrate, or to set up a goal of living where they are, is always have a goal. And because otherwise you're just gonna work to survive, and not really be happy at the end of the day. I think I wouldn't be happy if I was just working to survive.
No, you're absolutely right. And another thing, in addition to what you said about knowing your limits, some people are luckier than others. What I mean by that is, I was pretty lucky that I had skills as an electrician. I was an electrician by trade, and I had experience in telecommunication. So for me, it was much easier to find a job and get a sponsor. So knowing your limits. So if you try to immigrate and you don't have any work experience, and you always been like a bartender, you need to know that it will be much harder to get a sponsor, because what it means to get a sponsor means that the company that is sponsoring you needs to prove to the immigration that is hiring you immigrant, because there's nobody else in the country that can do your job. So of course, if you are highly trained, it will be easier for them to prove that needs you, instead of getting, because they can prove that there's nobody else that can do the job that you can do. But if you're a bartender or any other of this job, it's much harder for them to prove that they take you because you're much better. It's so much harder. So that's one thing to keep in mind when you're trying to immigrate.
Definitely, yeah, that's very true. It's and that's the same process for when you are trying to get your work visa after school. It's you're competing for a set number of visas a year. I don't know what it is right now, but I know when I was doing mine, it was like some number like 60,000 visas per year. And you had they open up on next day. I forgot what it was. And then by 2 days later, you got the notification either you made it or you did not. And it was because they will just exhaust the visas in a couple of days. So it is knowing that, knowing that you may not get it on the first trial. You may have to go to the second trial, and being prepared for those, because it takes time. it's not, sometimes it's not as, like you said, some people get really lucky and they get it on the first try and you're good to go. But some others are not so lucky and they have to figure out other ways to come up with their plans to be able to stay and be able to be legally in the country.
And you said to get this visa is like a just matter of how quick you're applying for the visa, or depend on like your score and your grades?
That one, it's how quick you apply.
Oh, really?
How quick the attorneys of the company are. And of course, how quick the attorneys are is how big the company is and how much they're paying them. So because it's not cheap. A sponsorship is not something that is cheap, and nowadays they're rare to come by. But at the same time, your grades or that doesn't come into play nowadays. It's mainly the attorneys putting in for the visa application and luck. Hopefully, immigration gets your application into one of those packages and they get it.
And speaking of luck, do you feel lucky to be an immigrant?
Definitely, I do think so. Because I've been able to really have a good experience. Yes, there have been tough moments. There have been moments that I'm like, what am I doing? Of course, those were probably a few years back. But the good things that I've been able to do here and the satisfactions that I've had here from meeting my wife and from doing other things that I know I wouldn't have been able to do in my country or even professionally, they overcome anything that negative that happened or any sour times that I might have had at the beginning. So yeah, I do consider myself very lucky to be able to take this opportunity and have made the best out of it. Because I think, as in any experience, any journeys, you tell your story depending on how good or bad you did at it. And I think my experience has been relatively positive. I've had many good times, both personal, professional. So for me, it has been a good. I don't have any bad stories to tell. For me, anything that probably you can consider bad to me has been more of a learning experience. Any bad job that you had, any bad job experience that you had, or any in school or anything that you may have had, to me is like, yeah, I won't do that again, or I just learned from that. But yeah, to me it's been very good, and I really don't have any regrets or anything like that.
Yeah, that's great. And if you could have like a time machine and you could go back in time, what would you tell to your young self?
Wow. What would I tell my young self? I don't know. I think that's one thing that I really haven't thought about that. But now that you mention it, it's more like maybe live a little bit more. When I was in school, I was so much concentrated on getting good grades and trying to not fail any classes, and because I knew, number one, I had scholarships, and number two, if I failed a class, my parents couldn't pay for it. I had to pay for it. So it was like, all right, if I party too much and I failed this class, that means I have to work double so I can pay that class. So to me, it's more like maybe finding that balance a little bit more, and not simply just, because sometimes I do feel like I missed out a little bit on those college years. I mean, I made up for it later on, but it's looking back, and I think that's the only thing that I would have told myself is like, live a little bit more. Don't be so rigid about those things, and enjoy it a little bit more. Enjoy your moment, enjoy your life a little bit more, and you'll be okay.
Yeah, that's a really hard thing to do, though, because if something goes wrong, if you fail, the price to pay is really high.
It is, yeah. And at the time, that's why I didn't do it too much.
Yeah, no, I get it. I totally get it.
Doesn't mean that I didn't party, but I did. But I was my roommates. I always joke with them because they were all business majors, and I was like, "You guys don't study. I mean, you guys can party day in, day out, and still get good grades. If I party day in, day out, I'm gonna fail." So I always joke with them, and we're still good friends, and they still party day in, day out. But it's a different mindset, I guess. But that was pretty much my mindset at the time. I just wanted to get through school, and in one try, I didn't want to repeat any classes or anything like that.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Awesome. Well, it was a pleasure having you here on the show. And if people wants to get in touch with you, is there any way they can contact you?
Sure. My Instagram is Pipeline81. Just like you hear it, Pipeline81. That's probably the easiest way to get in touch with me, through Instagram.
Awesome. I will put your link in the show notes for people that if they want to reach out to you. Perfect. Awesome. Thank you so much for being on the show and taking the time to do this interview.
All right. Thank you, Daniel, for having me.
No worries. Okay. Thanks.
Right.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for tuning in this week. I hope you enjoyed this episode and maybe found some useful information. You can find the show notes with all the things and the links we discussed in this episode on our website, immigrantslife.com/episode 15. Do you want to be on the show? You can visit immigrantslife.com/yourstory. Also, starting from last week, every weekend we share a little story about famous immigrants on our social media, so make sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Thanks again for listening. Talk to you in the next one. Ciao!